I've had some awesome work experience, but I am still the demographic that we all are here to serve. I come from a low-income background, but have worked hard to be a part of high-level thinking arenas such as Close It. And so it's just an amazing experience to be here every year and share thoughts and bump shoulders with people who are all doing such good work to make to close the skills gap. So I love Jumay. She's an awesome friend to have. So we just really appreciate you guys all coming and supporting us. So let's make ship happen today.
So I got the opportunity to meet Derek when he was one of the opportunity youth with the Kellogg Foundation in 2010. And we held our first Close It in 2013. And I got lots of pushback on holding Close It. What do you think you're doing? Why are you doing this? This is ridiculous. You're going to lose money, blah, blah, blah. We didn't lose money. I think we netted $1. But Derek stood up after that event and he said, I want you to know that this means so much to me to be part of this. And after that inspiration, I couldn't stop. So yesterday was awesome, exciting, action-packed. I hope you had fun at the party. Special thanks to Road Trip Nation. My gosh, that bus is incredible. The show's incredible. We will make sure we push out the show so you can watch the entire thing online, and please share with your friends and family. So thanks to Mike and Tim and the Road Trip team. I want to introduce now President of Kaplan, Brandon Busteed, not Kaplan, but Kaplan Higher Education. Brandon will tell you his title. Brandon Busteed has been part of Close It many years and also been Wallerstein, CEO and founder of Whiteboard Advisors. And they're going to kick us off. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, all right, we're gonna sit. I'll hand you this one back.
Feel like we need a few more guests at the table.
Yeah, we got room up here if anybody wants to come up and hang with us. Heather, hi. Come on up. You can hang with us this morning. It's okay. You don't have to talk. We
Yeah.
How you doing, man?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. I was gonna ask how your sock game was, but I think you're wearing pajamas right now.
Stronger than mine.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've got and you've got a nicer shirt. But here we are. I'm gonna ask Brandon a few questions. Thanks, Jumay, and thrilled to be here. I remember the first Close It Summit, and people didn't really get it. Like, is it about K-12? Is it about higher ed? Is it about a workforce? There's sort of corporate learning and HR people. And in the years since, there has been a real. Oh, sorry. In the years since, there's been this real macro shift toward the intersection of education and employment. A shift away from, in the education context, proxies, third grade reading. You just had a really neat piece. If you didn't read it, it was in Scientific American, which is pretty fancy. That's focused on the merger of education and work. And I was wondering if you might just, assuming not everyone read that, give a quick flyby on what you meant and what you wrote in that article.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the wheelhouse of the conversations that are happening at a conference like this and have been happening at a conference like this. There's a couple things, right? I think it's appropriate to talk about this as what should be a merger of education and work. And I mean that in both literal and figurative sense, right? If you look at some of the big movements that are happening right now, it's about how educational providers of all shapes and sizes, right, from K-12 through higher ed, are trying to figure out how to make education more work relevant. And on the employer side of things, there are just so many different factors that are forcing them to a natural conclusion that they actually don't have a choice around this, in my opinion, that they have to become learning organizations. They have to become education organizations. And you're seeing every different form of this, from partnerships with higher education institutions to them just developing this capacity on their own. I mean, the announcement about Amazon's $700 million investment in education and training for employees, Ben, largely has nothing to do with college degrees.
Right.
I mean, you know, if that's not a wake-up call for higher education in the United States, I don't know what is. But in essence, you say, okay, why am I lobbying for this merger of education and work? There's two simple reasons. One, it's where the efficacy points us. So if you say, Brandon, what makes for a successful graduate, a successful educational experience? It's really simple. It was the combination of what they were learning in the classroom and the way we think of that traditionally with its application to something in the real world of work. So to simplify, work integrated learning is the most effective way for us to learn and to be productive. And then the second reason is we don't have a choice anymore. Some of you might have caught the IBM study. I think, Heather, you actually wrote about this, but recent study that came out where just since 2014, this is in 5 years, employers, when they were asked what the average time was that they were dedicating to the upskilling of their workforce, in 2014 it was 3 days. And this year, it's 32 days. So in 5 years, the number of days they're spending on average on the upskilling front has gone up 10x. And of course, the shelf life of the things that they're learning is decreasing. So here's the simple point. We have no choice but to think about, in every way possible, this merger of education and work.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. There's an interesting McKinsey study that came out in the last year that focused on the sort of like murky middle of jobs that are transforming, right? So we tend to think a lot about the truck drivers that are being automated out of existence, right? Or the demand for coders and computer scientists. But what we forget are the ways in which the job of an insurance adjuster is changing as a result of the implementation of new technology. And the McKinsey statistic, which is global, is that 60% of jobs are going to change 30%. Right, like that's what's driving the shift in this massive investment we're seeing in not just reskilling and upskilling, but ensuring that people are equipped with the tools and the digital literacy to navigate this new world of work. There's another shift that you've been writing a bunch about. You've called it GoPro early. You're a former college athlete. What do you mean by GoPro?
Not one that
early?
would have gone pro though. I was
Cross
involved
country?
in. Yeah, no one cares about cross country, but
Do cross country.
would have been neat to be pro in cross country. Yeah, that
Somebody
would be
just
awesome.
broke they just did the mile.
Sub
the
2 hour marathon. I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unbelievable. Easily the greatest human
Yeah.
athletic feat of the 21st century, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay,
Yeah.
let's look a couple
Yeah.
agreements for that.
He did have people running in like a V formation in front of him with a laser beam doing.
I get it, but
I could probably do it in 2 hours.
A human
with all
being
of that
still
help.
ran a marathon in
Yeah.
under 2 hours. I don't care what other things were.
Yeah, no,
part of it,
that's pretty
Because I
good.
guarantee you and I would have that, and we wouldn't make it in under 2 hours.
We wouldn't make it in under 2 hours. You're not going to.
Maybe not
you're
even
not going to
4.
do a plug for your protein squeezer company.
No,
Today
not
I was
going to do
plugging
that.
jewelry, so I feel.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that.
So
Yeah,
talk
I mean,
about
this,
GoPro early.
talk about major shifts that I see happening, and in the not too distant future, one of the studies that we led at University Partners, the division that I run at Kaplan, was a study of parents of K through 12th graders, and then we also just did, just in the last month, a follow-up of high school students, and we asked them about different models of how they might do higher education, right? Here's one important point. Parents and high school students still value higher education. They still value a college degree. But when we asked them about a number of different kinds of routes through which they could accomplish a college degree, one of the things that tested off the charts in their interest at both the parent level and the student level is the idea of getting recruited directly out of high school into a full-time job where that employer offers college as part of the package. And this, by the way, is not necessarily a new model. I see Andrea, who's going to come up here soon. Like we've obviously built a powerful model in the United States of how we help adult learners who are working full time go through college. Like this is not new. What we're talking about though here is its application for traditional age students who are in that 18 to 22-year-old category. Here's the interesting stats: 74% of all parents would be interested in that model for their son or daughter, and 56% of all high school students, if they were given that kind of opportunity, would consider it. So this is not the kind of thing where if you crack the door open, a few people might walk through it. This is something where if we crack that door open, it will literally be a flood of interest. And here's the fascinating point about it. You say, well, who's really interested in this? This isn't your classic vo-tech pathway that we're talking about, which has also been an obviously apparent way for this to happen. But this is the idea of I go into jobs that are on the track for what we would consider middle skill or high skill jobs. And this is basically taking top talent students out of high school. The students who are most interested in this model are the ones who are academically top performers, more likely to be involved in AP classes, more likely to have an interest or an idea of what they want to do in a career, which makes a little sense. They're essentially the eager beavers who are ready to get at it. And they value college, but they do not see as much value in the traditional college experience. What they see value in, Ben, is the ability to work and learn at the same time. So they actually value the pedagogical model of I'm working and learning together, as opposed to I'm just doing this theoretically or from a pure academic perspective. And so, look, here's a simple point. I wrote this article in April about this GoPro early model. A month later, Walmart, the largest employer in the United States, announced that they were going to start recruiting students directly out of high school and offering a college degree as part of the program. This is going to happen. It's a shift that we're going to see in substantial numbers.
What percentage of students at post-secondary institutions, let's call them four-year institutions, 10 years from now are attending full-time? What percentage are attending part-time, or I should say, what percentage are working full-time while they're going to school?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the percentage that I've forecasted is that a third of traditional age students will be pursuing a GoPro early model of college within the next decade. So if you want to kind of back that out, obviously it says that the majority will still be considering a traditional, what we would think of today as the typical college path of a residential experience or whatnot. But a third is a significant estimate, right? Like that for example, if you're a higher education institution that doesn't adjust to this model, I mean, you're in big trouble. I mean, we've got about 4,000 higher ed institutions in the U.S., and I don't quite have the same kind of prediction that a Clay Christensen does in terms of how many are going to go away. But if you lose a third of that population in terms of residential facilities, keep in mind, they're still going to be enrolled in college. They're just primarily going to be doing this through online programs. You're going to, it's going to contribute to the extinction of a number of institutions unless they can figure out how to embrace that model. How does college become part of an employer model? And so here's the shift. This is the fundamental shift. Students, instead of going to college to get a job, which is their number one motivation for going to college, instead of going to college to get a job, they're going to go get a job to get college. And I just think you're going to see that in increasing numbers. The biggest reasons why: they want to avoid student loan debt. The price tags are just absolutely out of control. And so that's going to be the other thing that we have to wrestle with. Higher education has to find a way to reduce its costs, not just add more financial aid to the picture.
Well, the other piece, it strikes me, is keeping pace with the demands of the labor market. I mean, because the legacy model is, right, like post-secondary institution sends faculty or institutional leadership to meet with employers, right? They design programs that sort of approximate the needs of the employers at that time. 6 months, 8 months later, maybe a year or two later, post-secondary institution markets a program to students that approximates the needs of employers 2 years ago, right? And so the compression of the time to market of education programs that are more tightly coupled with the demands of the labor market,
Right.
Needs to change as well.
Look, there's another one that will sound a little controversial. I think you're going to start to see a new form of accrediting in the United States where, most of us, don't really understand accreditation. It's a black box to most Americans in terms of how it works. But I think the ultimate accreditors are employers. And I think we're going to see some major shifts in accreditation from that perspective, because here's a simple point. Even if it's not an accredited program, if Amazon says that's working for us, that is accredited.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, hopefully I've put enough shock and awe into the system to get a few things kicked up here.
Terrific.
And I know you've got to introduce one of the gurus on this subject, so
Andrea.
Yeah, so I will.
Cool. All right. Well,
I will let you go,
thank
man.
you. You're
Thank you.
our MC for the
Appreciate
day.
it. Yes.
We're looking forward to it. I am, certainly.
Yeah.
Great to share the stage with you.
All right.
And breakfast with Ben and Brandon.
Hey, I gotta say, you guys have got to do a talk show. You guys rock.
Great.
And include Heather, because you gotta have the woman too. Both of these guys have been such good friends of Innovate Educate for a decade, and I'm really grateful, so thank you.
Thank you. Where is Andrea? Oh, there she is. She's getting mic'd up.
Great, yeah.
I'm really excited to introduce Andrea. She is the Chief Employability Officer. I think I'll go out on a limb and say you're the first Chief Employability Officer at a post-secondary institution in the U.S.
I think that's accurate, although I didn't put it on my slides because I didn't want to be held accountable for the fact.
I won't get you in trouble with the creditors, but when Brandon talks about employability and the role of employers in shaping post-secondary education, the urgency of more tightly coupling what's happening within institutions with the demands of the labor market, thinking about, as you do, not just the skills, but the behaviors that need to be developed through post-secondary education in order to ensure that your graduates are, in fact, employable and thriving in the world of work is something that you're obviously very much on the front lines of. So I'm thrilled to introduce you. I'll leave the stage. I won't take, is this your phone, Jemay? Do you need this? I'm going to grab Jemay's phone and turn it over to Andrea.
I am trying to.
There you go.
Morning, sorry for that. I am lavaliered and I have a mic that works, so excuse me if there's any kind of noise. I usually move, and Jemay said there's a massive table, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to move the way that you typically do. So forgive me for moving a little bit differently than I might otherwise, but I don't want to be stuck behind the podium. I'm so grateful to be here. I've never been to Santa Fe. I love Santa Fe, Jemay. Like, I will totally come back to Santa Fe, and I'm really grateful to have met so many interesting, thoughtful, passionate people. My name is Andrea Backman, and I'm representing today Strategic Education, Inc. So this is the Office of Employability. So I only have 10 minutes, and I'm going to hopefully share things that I think will be conversation starters with a lot of you. But before I get started, and I literally can't make this up, and for those people in the room who know me, and how many of my colleagues are in the room here? Did anybody get up early enough? Thank you for showing up. I took an Uber, which was probably lazy because I was pretty close, from my hotel here. My Uber driver's name was Georgie. And Georgie asked me what I did, so I tried to describe what I do. It's not as easy as sort of previous roles. And he said to me, I don't mean to be crass, but can I tell you a joke? I said, please. And I always start with a story, and I didn't have one today, so I'm so grateful to Georgie that he gave me this, and I'm not making it up. Georgie said, do you know the difference between a pizza pie and a college graduate? Do any of you know, have any of you heard this joke? Because I had not heard it before. Raise your hand if you've heard it. A pizza pie can feed a family of 4. I literally couldn't have found a better quote to start this with. So thank you for humor. I couldn't believe it. There I was in this. So Georgie's right, though, and that's the point of the conversation today. So for those of you who don't know SEI, in August of last year, Strayer Education and Capella Education merged. I had never been through a merger before. I think it's been an absolute beautiful marriage. But what we have today under the umbrella of Strategic Education, or SEI, are 2 pretty large, significant universities, one undergraduate focused, one really graduate doctoral focused, 100,000 learners and probably double that in alumni. So we have massive work underway to do things differently, and what Brandon was just talking about is exactly in line. That is not what I'm going to share today, but we have a lot of work to think about alternatives to the current structure. I have to move over here to flick, that's why I'm doing that. So, sorry, let me go here. So I have spent the last 25 years, a little hard to say that out loud, thinking about two really important issues that I think a lot of people in this room think about deeply. One is access, so opening the gates wide for people to access higher education. And the second one is academic achievement. So if you open the gates wide, you have a promise that you're making to the individuals that you've opened it to that they will realize their dream and get to the finish line. So I have had a great ride. I've worked with Jack Welch and his institute, the UVA for 7 years, DePaul University in Chicago for 7 years, Strayer University, and now I was asked to take on this new role as Chief Employability Officer. And I would have thought I would have paused because I thought I was on a trajectory for something else, but I was like, no, absolutely. Because the shift that I want to talk about for the next 7 minutes or so is really about economic mobility. We all talk about it, right? But it's a shift in not just thinking about access and achievement, but in thinking about professional and financial return for anybody who makes an investment in higher education. That being said, academic outcomes aren't enough. It could be blasphemy in some circles, but it's just not enough, and here's why. And college education is the second largest investment a person will make in his or her lifetime. And that assumes that the person will have the opportunity to buy a house. This is not to be taken lightly. People need measurable, impactful return on investment when they come to college. And we, as educators and professionals and the community of who we are as Americans, need to solve for this. And as you know, because we've talked about it, so I left these very high level, student debt levels are way too high, both nationally and at the individual student level. Time to completion is way too long. So if you take anything in your life that you think about year after year after year after year, it gets more efficient, it gets more productive, it gets slow, it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. That hasn't happened in higher education for the most part. It takes too long. And then return on investment, I know there are some people in this room who are thinking deeply about if someone invests $30,000 in a college education and interest rates are such and inflation is such, are they actually getting a return? But I will go out on a limb to say that we are not, as a nation, thinking about what return on investment is. And it's an imperative. We have to do it. So that is the work of my team. And my team is here in the room. We don't have a lot of time today, but happy to answer any questions. But we are focused on short-term and long-term employment gains for learners and graduates that has measurable, impactful ROI. And we don't wait till the day they graduate. We're starting now, the day they come with us, and helping them think about what do they expect to have happen, because they're going to spend $30,000 and they're going to spend 4 years and they're going to have time away from their children. So that's the mandate of my team, maniacally focused. So in a very short, this is a very, high-level way of just phrasing ROI as economic mobility, but what goes into our ROI calculations and how we think about it is actually quite complicated. So for anybody who's interested in learning what we're doing, I'm happy to share more when we have more time, but it's really about thinking about economic mobility. Within ROI, we have 3 levers. We think about these 3 levers all day long. It's debt, it's time to completion, and it's earnings over time. So these are the 3 things that we expect to move the needle on as a team. So high level, I'm going to give you an example of, so I started my role in January of what we're doing in each of these particular buckets. So on the debt front, institutions can continue to lower cost of education, and many have. We have certainly done that at our institutions, but students still choose to borrow to the max. And it is, when you look at borrowing against future earnings, against inflation, and it's not sustainable, as you all know. So we just took a group of 600 students. Well, we started with a pilot of 400. 200 students, after financial literacy counseling, it's nothing new, but it was a new kind of intervention, reduced their borrowing amounts by significant amounts. They didn't need it. When we talked to them about what it meant to do that later in life, they reduced. And so now we're scaling that. We've hit 600 students. The same pattern continues. So just different kinds of conversations with students can help reduce the amount that they take. On the time front, so time to completion, average time to completion needs to change. I mean, I know that a lot of us are hamstrung by clock hours and seat requirements. But on the Capella side, we have a really pioneered competency-based education to allow students and employers to spend less TA dollars on the employer front, and on the student front, get a credential at a time and pace that makes sense for them, really cutting down the amount of time and cost that students have in Capella. And we're spreading that across Strayer as well. It just takes a bit of time to do that. On the earnings fronts, trying to check my time here. There is a time clock here. There are two pathways that we're looking at. One is, if we're really serious about measuring earnings over time, we actually need to measure it. So we have a big work stream underway that Thomas on my team here is leading to collect incoming data every year they're with us, and would they attribute any earnings differential to what they're experiencing here with us, and then 1, 3, 5 years post-graduation. So we're measuring earnings, and we're doing a lot of other things. That's just a simplistic view. On the other part of it, we have massive interventions underway to help people understand you don't have to wait until you get a college degree to think about changing your earning trajectory. What are you going to do now? What have you accomplished? What can you put on your resume? How can you position yourself differently? This is the last thing I'm going to talk about today really quickly. I think I have a few minutes. We have, it's one slide that describes a whole bunch of 3 years worth of work, embedding ourselves with employers, big employers, sitting alongside of them, working with their frontline employees, trying to understand what skills do they have and what skills do they not have that you need in your organizations. So we pulled a team of talent and literally embedded them in big, big companies across the United States and worked with employers to come up with these 10 skills. I've heard a lot about skills. I'm so excited everybody is excited about the skills. A lot of them are evergreen and similar. What we've done is completely renovated? Reimagined, renovated, I guess, our general education curriculum as the start in both Strayer and Capella. These skills are baked into general education as a way to let students know that when you're learning about an introductory computer science course, the reason it matters is that employers care about productivity and creative thinking, and those are the things you're actually also going to learn in this course, and we're going to measure it, and we're going to tell you how we're doing. We launched this in summer, and the results have been amazing. So 1,200 students in pilot, 2,000 in control. Students who understood why they had to take this course and how it was connected to employer and what it is that was going to actually be advantageous for them are doing far better. So these skills, for those of you who are on the university side, 30 to 40% of an undergraduate degree program is the liberal arts. I'm a liberal arts major. I totally believe in the liberal arts. But if it's not connected to work, what are we doing? So that's what this is intended to do, and this is just the start. So with that, I'm just going to end on, because I wanted to get back to the theme, which is the shift, right? Is the shift that we need to continue to open the gates for access, and we need to continue to get people to the finish line for graduation, but we really, really need to be thinking about lifting people's return on investment and economic mobility and lifting them up. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Clearly, I would be a fan of every university in the country hiring a chief employability officer and creating that type of role. Last week, I spent the whole week in London, actually, and you know, in many respects, we think we've got the best higher education system in the world here in the U.S., and there's some reason to believe that, but let me just tell you a couple quick things. So, Andrea mentioned time to completion. And that's an increasingly important metric that we have to pay attention to. You know, we actually track things like 6-year graduation rates in the United States for bachelor's degrees, which is an indication of how bad things have gotten. A bachelor's degree should take 4 years. And if you actually accelerate it, it could take 3 or even less in a number of different situations. Some of you, of course, know in the UK, a bachelor's degree is 3 years. And part of it is a difference in their K-12 system, but it's also just a fundamental difference in time to degree for a bachelor's degree. So you think about this for a second. Oh, by the way, the top-ranked universities in the world, a handful of them are from the UK, a handful from the US. You know what the average price differential is between the top-ranked universities in the world in England compared to the top-ranked universities here? They are less than 1/3 of the cost. We're not globally competitive anymore. And I hope that's not a newsflash to everybody in the room, but that's the case. I could send my daughter or my son to England to get a bachelor's degree in 3 years. Here, it's 4 years, right? Talk about ROI. This was another interesting one. I was at Nottingham Trent University, and we were talking about the importance of what they call placements, what we would call internships. And I asked them out of curiosity, I said, well, how many people do you have in your placements office? Wait for it. You want to know what the average number of staff in a career services office is in the United States for colleges and universities in the US? I'll give you the ratio. It's about 3,000 students to 1 career counselor in the United States. At Nottingham Trent University, they had 80 full-time staff in their placements office alone. So I just kind of wanted to sprinkle in some revelations I had last week in terms of thinking about where the US is relative to the rest of the globe. We've got some eye-opening challenges in front of us, and I'm grateful for Andrea's leadership and the work that Strayer and Capella are doing. When I was at Gallup, I had the chance to do an alumni outcome study for Capella, actually, and the outcomes for earnings and job placement were really spectacular. And it's because they have made this a central part of their focus. So with that, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Javarro Russell, who is the Vice President of Business Development and Innovation at ETS, and also a fellow Virginian. So, Dr. Russell, come on up.
Thank you. Hello. I think we are about to get going. And I think he just gave me a promotion as well. And so I've been thinking about the work that I do at ETS, spending a lot of time in business development and in the innovation space, and speaking to institutions, employers, students, workers about what skills they need. And I'm often trying to define how am I going to impact these people in ways that allow them to do the work that they do a lot better than what they've done before. But not for the sake of them, but for the sake of these two that you see on the screen here. This is my son Abraham and my niece Kinsley. And we had a conversation, I guess a couple of weeks ago about what I did. You know, we went to a park and they had the fire truck and the policemen. And I said, well, you know, I have a cool job too. And they said, well, what is that? And I said, well, I help people learn. And she said, well, how? And you typically don't get how questions from kids. You get why, you know, but this time around they asked me, well, how does that work? Well, I make a bunch of questions and I ask them, and then they give me answers, and then I hope they do something with the information after that. And I realized in my response to them that it is really difficult explaining how do we use the information that we gain about what people know, what people are able to do, and make inferences from that information in such a way that it allows us to meet our goals and our purposes. And so today, I wanted to speak to you about the ways in which ETS is attempting to do just that through a project that we're calling Skills for the New Economy. So the how, as I explained to my son and my niece, is a bit more complicated than what I suggested. ETS has about 70 years of history in doing exactly what I just suggested, developing tests that allow us to measure the skills that we can't typically put our hands on. We don't have a bunch of people sitting in rooms making up multiple choice questions, as many people think that occurs at ETS. What actually happens is that we have research scientists that think really deeply about how do we best measure or understand the skill sets that people have, and how do we elicit tasks that allows individuals to demonstrate what they're able to do in those skill sets. And we've been doing this for years. Annually, we produce around 50 million assessments. We have around 200 R&D scientists, as well as another 100 data scientists. And we are well equipped to do this work, and we've been doing it with longstanding partnerships that include OECD and many of the states in terms of their K through 12 testing. So we know how to do it. So how do we leverage that capability to address some of the problems that you all have been attempting to address in your own work? Dealing with the issues of in-demand skills that are changing over time, post-secondary outcomes not meeting the needs of society, the students themselves and employers, and dealing with the direct needs of employers identifying talent with the skill sets that allow their businesses to thrive. Furthermore, because complicating the issue is just what we like to do as researchers, companies are no longer requiring degrees. It may be a bit too early to call this a trend, but we know that this is occurring. And we know that individuals are also taking on jobs that don't necessarily require the degrees that they currently do have. So how does all of this come together, and what does that mean for the way in which we signal the skills that individuals have? And employers historically have been reluctant to assess on some of these non-cognitive skills that many of you have heard are now important to the future of learning and the future of work. And college degrees continue to increase in expense. All of this muddles the ecosystem that we are all trying to innovate within. So oftentimes we're dealing with a lot of noise around the issues that we're attempting to address in this space. And part of the work that we do at ETS is trying to remove the noise, decrease the amount of error in the ways in which we understand and use information about the skills that individuals are able to demonstrate. So the ways in which we do this is often through developing a perspective on the ways in which we should use information about skills, and helping us to develop those perspectives of the same information that you all use. The number of Americans currently in the labor force is 160 million. National post-secondary attainment rates continue to arise, and 70% of Americans still strongly agree that having a degree or professional certificate is essential to their professional goals. But here's where the part of this project becomes a little bit more difficult. The diploma itself serves as a screening device that allows businesses to narrow down the applicant pool quickly and almost without cost to the employer, but with a huge financial burden to the individual. This creates a system that allows us to take advantage of individuals in their attempts to gain the skills needed to be successful in the workforce. So when we think about the ways in which we begin to address some of these problems in this space, there are really two mantras that we want to ensure are out front. One is the purpose for which we want to begin measuring these skills, and the other is the fairness behind that measurement. But we're dealing with this in a space that has many competing motivations. Employers want employees that have skills that will be relevant not only for the job today, but also for the jobs of tomorrow. But employers are often not interested in paying to ensure that individuals have those jobs for today and those jobs for tomorrow. They're also concerned about the liability of assessing those skills in ways that may adversely impact the talent pool or actually even slow down the talent pool that goes into their jobs. And they're also worried about attempting to divorce, this is a very important one, worried about the attempting to divorce hiring managers from using their intuition to hire candidates and talent at their firms. Higher ed institutions want to ensure that their students are prepared for the future of work. And at the institution, they are more incentivized to ensure that students are graduating from their institutions rather than having those skills that are required in the workforce. So the motivation for the institutions to ensure that individuals have those skills are competing with their desire to ensure that individuals leave their institution with a credential. And skills assessment, as we have developed them, can also compete with the currency that the institutions provide, which is that diploma. If we only measure the skills and those skills measurements become much more useful than the diploma, then what does it say about the value of the institution? And then there's the students themselves. We want to ensure that students have these skills and are able to demonstrate them in the workforce and elsewhere. The problem is, most of the time, to ensure that students have those skills, they have to take an assessment. There are rarely a student that wants to take an assessment for any reason. Most of the time, if you compel them, that means you're getting information that only exists for that one particular reason that they want to get that job. And then these stakeholders, of course, are coming up in an environment that is often over-assessed as well. So introducing them to another assessment that will require them to demonstrate their skills is not often something that they're interested in. So in order for us to reconcile some of these competing motivations and some of the issues that are in this space, ETS is beginning to develop these collabs where we're bringing together employers, institutions of higher ed, and students and workers that are students as well. And we're going to be talking to them about all of the issues that are related to signaling the skills needed to demonstrate preparedness for the future of work. But the problems that we are facing is that as a testing company, we have to consider all of the intricacies of developing assessments that measure these skills. So oftentimes, we are marching alone in this space of innovation because we are well aware of the issues that are going to face anyone that is interested in measuring these skills in a way that allows individuals to demonstrate what they know, not only for today, but for the future of work. We have to consider higher ed's needs, and that includes where higher ed is going in terms of their interest in developing micro-credentialing programs as well as that 4-year degree. We have to consider the individual's needs, the students and the workers in terms of their desire to own a credential of a particular skill that they have, and how can that credential be portable across their time in the workspace as well. And then we have to work with employers and really identify what it is that they want to measure. When I go to the employers and I ask them about particular skills that they are interested in, and they tell me that they want critical thinking skills, and they want to ensure that anyone going into their space of employment has this particular skill. And then I ask them, well, how do you measure the critical thinking skills of the folks that are already within your place of employment? They often say they don't. So there is no real criterion of interests. So there's a lot of lip service that we have to work our way through as well. And so we're doing that by bringing each of these parties together and having constructive conversations about the skills that individuals need to perform well in their workplace, and address them by understanding the constraints of assessment and what we can and cannot do in terms of our abilities to measure these skills. That is all. Thank you.
I'm just here to make a transition and say that I messed up on the price of the raffle tickets. They're $20 instead of $10. So if you filled out 2, you can either give us 40 or you can rip one up. So I'm excited, really excited for this next session. My good friend and now partner of a new company, Dr. Parminder Jassal, is going to be moderating an amazing panel of funders from philanthropy to venture capital. So please welcome Parminder.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of fun with funding. We have 6 speakers that need to get set up here real quick. And, you know, I'm going to do a little quick advertisement while they're getting set up. So a couple years ago when Close It was in Dallas, I bought cowboy boots. And this year, and I don't have a say on those cowboy boats because my daughter took them over. And so this year, I got this bracelet from the back that's all gemstones and little reminder of Santa Fe. So what I wanted to say was, make sure you get back there and look at the things that are out there. I've already gotten a ton of compliments on this bracelet. Kind of weird because don't really plan on buying other things beyond work and learn products. So it's really interesting to go back there. So check it out. Okay, so we have very talented people here today, 6 people. So I'm not going to do very much talking. This is shift. We're talking about this large work and learn shift out there. And when we talk about it, we say, this needs to change, that needs to change. That's all super great. How are we going to fund everything as we make those changes? That's what these experts are going to be talking about today. We have 6 experts, and they're seated very strategically. So it's all planned out. And if you think of funding as a continuum of type, that you can strategically think through on how you will build a company or fund an innovation, you can kind of think of a continuum like the one that you see on the screens. And one that goes from VC funding all the way to philanthropy. There's lots of different products on the market, products that range from, here, we'll invest and we'll take a piece of your company. And you know what? We need 20x return on whatever we invest. And when you sell, we want to get a chunk back. All the way to philanthropy, which, you know, there was a lot of traditionally, talk about 10, 15, 20 years ago, where you could get an investment around ideas and start building something from scratch, and it was almost like seed money, where the returns were a little bit different. And now we have this whole new space of social impact that starts to combine these things. So it's getting really confusing, just like it's confusing navigating working and learning. It's just as confusing navigating the funding piece of this. And so these experts are going to help us figure it out. Here on the VC side is represented by Jason Palmer with New Markets Ventures. He's with the firm that's one of the nation's largest education-focused venture capital firm, and claims to be a double bottom line investor. So we'll just find out what that means. And right next to him, you guys wave or something. So that was Jason, and then Doug, right next to him, he's a professor and managing director and on the investment committee for University of Southern California's Edventures incubator, with the goal of improving the quality and equity of education. So we have them here kind of clustered together under the VC part of the continuum. Let's move to social impact with Marissa Lowman from Village Capital and Elizabeth Garlow from Lumina. So Marissa leads the future of work practice at Village Capital. And prior to that was at Learn Capital, where she focused on product development and investment due diligence. Elizabeth is with Lumina's venture group, where she invests in early stage ventures focused on post-secondary education and skill building. And then let's move over to the far end of the continuum with Rachel and Charles. Rachel is a program officer with the Ford Foundation's Future of Workers initiative, which seeks to build a more just and inclusive future for workers in our rapidly changing economy. And then Charles, last but least. On the end of the continuum, he's a senior manager for social innovation partnerships at Fossil Foundation that makes smart financial investments in their partners, organizations, and programs. So we've got a huge variety here of experts, and I know everyone out there is pretty envious of my position here. So we're going to actually talk about how different funders invest differently. Does the structure of an organization make a difference to the funder? Does it make you eligible for a certain kind of funding or not? So my first question for our experts is, do you fund anything other than for-profits? Yes or no? Do you fund anything other than for-profits? For-profit. So, what do you have?
No.
No. So, we have oh no, keep them up, please. Keep them up. So, do you fund anything other than nonprofits? What's interesting about this, let me make sure. 3 yeses and 3 nos. Wonder how that happened. So let me start on this end of the continuum with Jason. Why don't you talk about what that means for you? Why is there such a stark difference on this continuum?
I don't know if it's a stark difference. It's that, so New Markets receives funding from organizations like ACT, Lumina's an investor in us, and they invest from their endowments. So imagine that this is the 95% of their funds that would otherwise be invested in index funds or other for-profit things where they want that endowment to grow. So we are actually judged quite rigorously on what types of returns we provide to our investors. So therefore we could not possibly invest in nonprofits because nonprofits are not going to generate a return for us.
Awesome. So Charles, how do you get a no up?
Well,
or yes, I mean. So the question was, do you fund anything other than for-profits? No.
Well, we fund mostly nonprofits, but I wish you could ask, if we fund anything other than nonprofits, because I would put up yes as well. Mm-hmm. So on this side, I think we're very impact focused, and whether the impact is generated by for-profits or nonprofits, we can make the case to fund them. Right. And those are the returns that we look for. And we do have several for-profit partners that we work with. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for impact, and we think everyone can contribute to impact.
Okay, great. So right in the middle there in the social impact cluster with Marissa and Elizabeth, you actually had different answers held up. Can you talk a little bit about your answers?
Can I start?
Especially since you're both categorized the same here.
Sure. So, hi everyone. I work with Lumina Foundation. We're a private foundation based in Indianapolis, and we focus on post-high school education pathways here in the U.S. And the reason my answer is also a bit of a hybrid is that I sit within a philanthropic institution that has a number of different capital tools at our disposal. Excuse me. So we have an impact investing practice where, for those in the room who have navigated the program-related investment space, God bless you, you know that that tool is used differently by different types of foundations. We are using our PRI tool to make direct equity investments in ventures that we think can be good strategic partners for us in our mission. So in that sense, we're looking at for-profit companies that could benefit from a strategic investment from Lumina Foundation. We also have grant funding that we use to both build the ecosystem of pipeline that we could be investing in. So we work closely with Village Capital on the entrepreneurs that they're developing. And then, in fact, we actually have had some of our companies in our impact investment pipeline benefit from some grant funding on a different side of the house, as they've thought to use grant dollars to run pilots with government agencies or minority-serving institutions that might not have budget readily at their disposal to test their innovation.
Awesome. And how would you kind of respond to that, Marissa?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I work at Village Capital. We have been around for about 10 years. We find, train, and invest in early-stage startups through investor readiness programs. So the reason we only work with for-profit startups is that we're really training entrepreneurs to think like investors throughout the course of our programs. And we have developed a peer selection model where the entrepreneurs actually make the investment decision on our behalf. So at the end of each program, which typically consists of about 12 companies in the program, 2 of those companies are selected by our entrepreneurs through a variety of characteristics that we've come up with that we think make a successful company. They're essentially ranking each other on all of those characteristics, focusing on potential and return on investment. And then we have our affiliated venture capital fund called VilCap Investments that has traditionally made investments of 75 to 100K in the US and 50 to 75K internationally in those companies. And then, we have discretion later on to do follow-on investments. But all of our investments have an impact focus. And we invest across 3 areas, so future of work, financial inclusion, as well as sustainability.
Great. So let's go back to a little bit farther out on the continuum. Ford Foundation is huge. We all know Ford Foundation, and there's lots of things going on there. So Rachel, can you talk a little bit about why, at this point, do you fund anything other than for-profits, and your answer?
Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks for having me here. When you had us wave, by the way, it was very hard for me not to wave the way that my 6-month-old is currently waving, which is like this. I'm determined to make this like a global wave, so if you want to help me with that. So at Ford, the truth is I could be sitting anywhere along this spectrum because different parts of our house invest in different ways. So my portfolio tends to rely much more heavily on grant funding and also PRIs. But as some folks may know, we actually carved out $1 billion from our endowment, so that 95% of our assets, to try and invest through more of a social impact approach. So I think all of these tools are really important. And the bottom line is every dollar that anyone puts out into the world is either going to have a positive, negative, or a neutral effect when it comes to really challenging the structural inequities that we're all working to address. So I think the fact that we're all up here holding up different cards is a good thing for the space. We need all of these different tools. However, what I think we need to do a better job about as funders is making it clear what the tools are that each of us has, being a little bit more accessible, making it clear why we have some tools and not others, and making sure that all of the organizations that we partner with and have the honor to support really understand that, while you may come in as a grantee, maybe you can actually grow and eventually become an organization that's taking on PRI funding, or maybe there's even an opportunity to connect with investments we're making from our endowment. And I think we as funders need to see the way organizations can change and evolve over time and be ready to use those different tools across our continuum.
Thanks. So now heading over to USC's Edventures Business Accelerator, Professor Lynch. Talk a little bit about your investment strategy there.
So in typical professorial fashion, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about.
Oh, great.
Which is that in some ways, taking money from any of us is problematic, right? So you're it's this dance that you do as an entrepreneur, and the question is, who do you want to marry, right? So you're either, serving the grant, or you're dealing with your investor, and there's pluses and minuses to both of that. The way I see this is that the need is enormous. You all represent, and I know that you all are true believers around that. If you think about it, in a knowledge economy, there's nothing more important than developing people. And the big problem is that the philanthropy is a really scarce resource. And the extent to which most education, you're all not going to like this, and I've only worked at universities my whole career, is a fee-for-service industry. Right? So it's like the sophists back in the Greeks. You teach, you hand out your hand, and you collect tuition from that. That's a business model. Right? So the extent to which, to me, there should be an intersection, and I get a little bit nervous when philanthropy starts acting exactly like investors, even though I would say our values are actually all quite similar. I know Jason pretty well. He understands the space in a way that most VC people don't, and that's another problem. But the point is that when there's a true market failure, I would say that's when philanthropy has to step in, when there's just no way that somebody can afford to pay based on where they are. But if there's a place where somebody can actually pay for something, the capital markets are much larger and much more flexible and much more efficient. And so I would say, let everything flourish. If you can make a business out of it, You go VC, if it's fundamental research or there's a true market failure, you sort of go philanthropy.
So it's not just about the structure of the organization. It's about what your overall outcomes are that you're looking for.
Can you charge something? If you cannot, I mean, look at whether you're not-for-profit or for-profit. I mean, it's interesting. Most higher ed, you know, you could argue, could all be for-profit. I know that's probably scandalous, but, you know, you charge tuition. Most universities are tuition-driven. And students are underwriting that, right? So, I mean, you know, the question
becomes... Still a business model.
Right, it's a business.
Exactly. So, we know that funders, you've kind of just heard this, just across this continuum, have different priorities. Some have a stronger focus on financial outcomes, whereas others are driven more by outcomes. Outcomes could be simple as we want to make the world a better place, or we want to see so many students move along a continuum, or maybe instead it's a focus on working learners, that because people are working and learning now and the blend of working and learning is happening, maybe that's the target population. Or maybe it's around equity, or maybe it's around all of those different kind of outcomes. And then there's funders that may focus on multiple things, and they have competing priorities. Are we looking for a 20x return, or are we looking for impact and outcomes, or are we looking for both? And that gets really hard, especially for the innovator. Like, what thing do we bring and highlight to a funder, and what is our priority going to really focus on? So my question is, for your organization, is profit the most important driver for your investment decision? And you know, we only gave them yes and no. We only gave you yes or no's.
Curious to see what Jason does.
Talk about innovation, huh? All right, so I think it's really interesting. It doesn't matter where you sit on the continuum, that profit is not the most important driver. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'd like to actually, I think in this case, yeah, let's start back on the extremes of the continuum again. However, I'm gonna ask Rachel this time. So Rachel, why do you say no, that profit is not the most important driver? And we're talking about more on the philanthropic side here.
Yeah. So the Ford Foundation is fundamentally committed to challenging inequality in all of its forms. And in order to do that, that means financial profit is not the #1 outcome that we care about. We're much more focused on equity.
All right, and what about you, Charles? And then we're gonna jump over to Jason here to hear the other end.
So I think the first conversation we have with a potential grantee is always around end game. You know, what is their end game? And do they have a vision for how they can envision a better world and better outcomes, and what their role is in that new world? Especially with nonprofits that we tend to fund, you know, as you said, I mean, there's limited philanthropic capital, and we want to know that they have a vision for how they will play a role where they can access the capital they need, whether it's philanthropic or not. We're not there to be a year after year funder of an organization, so we can't sustain any organization. We're there to provide risk capital to address market failure and to support a strategy where they can eventually access the capital that they do need for the end game role that they have. So outcomes can be delivered not just by individual organizations, but by system change. You know, so if someone is envisioning their intervention as being able to shift systems, as being able to change patterns in sectors, then we can look at that as the strategy and not necessarily the year after year growth of an organization as the output that we're looking for.
Thanks. So I think to me the biggest surprise was seeing the ends up here. that profit isn't the most important driver for your investment. And yet, all we hear about in the news is this company made it big. Here's the first billion-dollar IPO out there. And here's what's happening as far as financial returns goes. We hear them pounded by them every quarter through the earnings per share. And then when you get to applying for a grant or applying for any kind of social impact product, a loan or anything, it seems like it always comes down to the return. What's your business model? How much do you get back? How much is everyone going to make? So to me, that's a huge surprise that we saw so many no's up here. So I'm going to pick on you, Jason.
Sure.
Yeah, how do you respond to that?
So in our case, we have to have a double bottom line screen, by which I mean New Markets is all about metrics. So we care about the metrics for your financial performance, and we care about the metrics for your impact results. We've been around for 15 years, and my partners were some of the earliest people to actually require of all the companies that we invest in that they have 3 KPIs that are their top impact metrics. What are you trying to achieve on an impact dimension? And those get reported quarterly in our reports that we send out to all of our LPs, just like the financial metrics. We're also a founding member of a group called Impact Capital Managers, which is about 35 financial first impact investors. And by that, I mean, we actually are very focused on financial returns, but we wouldn't invest in a company that doesn't have impact as an equal value in the company. So that's mission-driven entrepreneurs, that's folks that know what they're trying to achieve, either on an equity dimension or on an outcomes dimension for low-income people, people of color, women, people with disabilities. So when companies come to us, I was saying yesterday on a different thing, there's a company that's built a really great product that helps line up which students need to get in which cars at the private schools in the United States of America. And they're selling like hotcakes, and somebody's going to make money on that company. We would not invest in that company. That company has no impact value. They are not trying to improve outcomes for the people who are the disadvantaged in our society. They're just trying to make things more efficient for the rich. That's not what we do. And even just the fact that we only invest in education and workforce companies makes me, if we had a VC table like this, I would be on the philanthropy end of the table because I only invest in impact-oriented companies in education and workforce, which is a really narrow slice of the world.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm wondering how many of you out there know what mission investing is versus product-related investing, or do you all know what all those differences are? Okay, there's a few of you. So why don't we kind of focus in on that area? Because in the social impact world, in the USC Edventures world, we start getting into these different kinds, program-related investments, et cetera. What does that mean? And why social impact focuses on that? Yeah, any of you jump in.
Sure, I can weigh in on this from a philanthropic standpoint. So there are a lot of acronyms out there, and the other day I actually was describing to a friend that I was working on an MRI investment, and they thought I was talking about a medical scan of the brain. And I realized I've just been a little too steeped in these acronyms recently. So when we talk about philanthropic investments, we do have, as was mentioned by Rachel and others before, a few different tools at our disposal. And I think the point that was made earlier about the market failures and the ways these different tools can address those market failures is of critical importance, because VC capital does not flow equitably in this country. And we've heard a lot of statistics thrown out over the course of the last day and a half about access to capital by female founders, founders of color, founders in certain geographies around the world that are not technology hubs, et cetera. So just to demystify these acronyms a little bit, MRIs are mission-related investments. They are typically made out of an endowment and often do target some level of market rate return comparable to other asset classes, but with an explicit focus on impact objectives. So a lot of what Jason just described as their approach could be considered as such. And in fact, we have made an MRI investment in Jason's fund. Program-related investments, as made from foundations, are a little bit different in that they're actually drawing upon a pool of grant resources within a foundation, and they also have need to have very clear mission objectives and in fact demonstrate, legally speaking, very clear alignment between the foundation's stated charitable mission and what that particular investee is set up to accomplish from a mission perspective. So for each PRI investment that we make, we actually do issue a legal opinion to demonstrate that alignment between mission objectives. But that capital also can be a little bit more flexible, and that's where I think actually this market failure piece is quite interesting, because we do tend to make excuse me, PRI investments in pretty early stage ventures that are struggling to access capital in the market and might need that signal of credibility in the market as they go to raise future rounds of capital. And so the ways that we can come in as an investor fairly early on do help signal to others the credibility around a particular product or service. We can take a very founder-friendly approach. We can work in concert with that entrepreneur to navigate what is increasingly a pretty crowded landscape, I would say, of education and workforce investors. And no two investors are alike. We've got a lot of new VC funds in the market. We have a lot of corporates that are now launching venture arms that are investing in education and workforce solutions. These are very different types of strategic investors. So helping these entrepreneurs navigate that landscape is sort of a critical value add that we can try to bring through a PRI transaction.
That's awesome. And Doug, what do you have to say?
So,
I see your...
so one, yeah, because I've been at this a long time, and you have two issues. One, Milton Friedman's dead, so I'm an economist, right? So this idea that it's all about the sole purpose is shareholder return, that's done.
Yeah.
The word entrepreneur, if you look in sort of Oxford English Dictionary, one of its roots really means champion. And I've always worked in higher ed, not-for-profit, and when I started to bump into all these entrepreneurs, as a group, there's some bad apples, but as a group, I was so surprised at how many of them are just trying to solve a problem, and simply that the most efficient way to access the capital to solve the problem is to go to the capital markets because the philanthropy is sort of really scarce. So I think it's a false dichotomy, but the real problem, and Jason got beat up a little bit for this recently, is how stupid most of the investment community is. Right? So again, I do all this due diligence work for these private equity firms. So he's part of a small group, of VC firms that actually know a little bit about learning. There's a whole bunch of other firms who know nothing about it and what they do, because this is not fintech or biotech. They assign their C team to the education space. So you get some 25-year-old kid who actually knows nothing, who is mapping done some quick analysis and said, oh, they've made $1 million off of one college, there's 4,000 colleges. Oh my gosh, this is a $4 billion company in like a year. Let's invest in it. And so I think as a community, in fact, one of the things with philanthropy, we need to do a much better job of educating the investors to sort of understand these things and get over this false dichotomy. I mean, I've been vilified because I play, it's sort of a Faustian thing. I play with the devil because I'm a university professor who works for for-profits. And it's not a problem.
Awesome. So the crowded marketplace space. There's this whole other thing that makes it really complex beyond the MRI, beyond the PRI, beyond the grants, beyond an equity investment. I mean, just that alphabet soup in itself is very, very confusing. And then on top of that, all we hear about is, oh, here's an incubator, here's an accelerator, they can help you, do this, do that, and that gets you this far along on the continuum of going really big and scaling. What does all that mean? How do you kind of navigate that, Marissa, especially at Village Capital? You guys have one of the most awesome incubators around a future of work and learning cohort. And I heard a couple of people up here say, yeah, they actually work with you on that too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So Village Capital is a nonprofit, and all of our investment readiness programs are funded by organizations like Lumina Foundation, AT&T, so a mix of corporates and foundations that care about these subsectors, so future of work, financial inclusion, and sustainability. And we really are striving to help entrepreneurs both get access to capital by connecting them to targeted mentors throughout our programs, access to strategic partners by bringing them in as mentors as well, and potential customers. So we do, in our programming, a large mix of peer-to-peer learning. We've developed a curriculum over the past 10 years to really help them think about what they need to grow their business, and then pair them with targeted mentors to help them do that faster. And also scale faster. And then, once they're alumni of the program, we still stay in contact with them, host annual events in the education and future of work sector for them, and then continue to, connect them to investors as they raise additional rounds.
So what does that mean to you, Jason, to have a little bit of a partnership with Village Capital for an incubator?
Yeah, well, I was going to jump in and say that it takes about 3 to 5 years for a for-profit, mission-driven company to get to a level where it could actually qualify for a new markets investment or for any of the other VCs in the space. And so now I'm seeing many of these startup companies going to Village Capital, going to Learn Launch, going to multiple incubator accelerators that exist out there, because you actually need to do that in order to get enough angel investment, to get enough mission-related investment, to get to the point where you finally qualify for we write $1 to $5 million checks. And I actually advise probably about 100 entrepreneurs that are in that small stage, mostly because I work with Marissa as an advisor to the Future of Work organization that she leads, but also because I work with some of those other accelerators too. And those entrepreneurs just need that time to get up to that size, to figure out the product market fit, to figure out how to scale their solution, to actually figure out how to pitch it to investors, to figure out how to think like a scalable organization. And so I think the accelerators are great, obviously, but if you're starting an organization that's trying to change the world, it will take 3 to 5 years to get it to a scale of, say, 1 to 2 million in revenue usually. That's just how long it takes. So it's a long, long effort.
And so another accelerator that's represented is Edventures here. And so what's your take on this, Doug?
So I've started 3, Penn's, NYU's, and now USC's. And there's a couple things. So one, I'm an old WASP, and I was really struck by how, if historically the human capital space has been women's work and has been overrepresented with people of color, and the second you look at entrepreneurs, there are all these old white guys. So we focus, without sort of being exclusive, on women of people of color. So we're just sort of launching our second cohort with no different criteria, no affirmative action. We're 85% women and people of color. Our first cohort, they raised $13 million with us. We do it totally virtually and personalized because we don't understand why for an accelerator you would have, for ed tech, you would have to move to LA. What I will say about the space too, and again, I sort of involved in starting these things, is you can lose sight very quickly where you get on the ed tech circuit. And you go from competition to accelerator to competition to accelerator, and you get sort of $50,000 here and $100,000 there. Mm-hmm. You learn how to sort of pitch really well. You actually never focus on customers or product, and you're sort of 2 years in and you've got nothing to show for it. So I actually think in some ways we need to emphasize more on sort of the nuts and bolts of just what is learning, what's needed in the space, how do you do it, and how do you sort of sell into higher ed, how do you sell into K-12, how do you sell into employers? Whereas most of the accelerators, not like the ones that specialize in education a little bit better, but most of them are just how to sort of speak in front of an audience, convince somebody to write you a check. And that tends to be what most of the sort of incubators in the countries do.
Rachel, jump in, especially with your experience from another philanthropy, Rockefeller, prior to this.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and say, I think it's easy to focus a lot on startups and entrepreneurs, and that's important, and I have done a lot of work in that space as well. But also, there are a lot of very large, established nonprofit organizations in the workforce and future of work space that have been around for a long time and are doing really good work. But they might still need an opportunity to step back and say, I've been caught in this cycle of project grant after project grant for 10, 20, 30 years. What would it look like for me to reimagine my revenue model and kind of reposition myself as an organization? And I actually think that as so many dollars move into the startup and entrepreneur space, we risk overlooking this other really kind of powerful group of actors over here. I had one grantee partner who was very much in this case, had about a 10-year track record, was doing some really powerful work in the retention and upskilling space. And what we were actually able to do with them was to help them identify a consultant that could think through their revenue generation model with them. And I mean, come on, Fortune 500 companies are paying a lot of money to consultants all the time to constantly be thinking about their revenue generation models. So I think as funders and as especially those of us on the grant making side, how can we level that playing field a little bit and make sure we're providing dollars in our grants so that nonprofits can also bring in consultants or others that could help them rethink their revenue model. So anyway, this grantee went through this process of really reimagining their revenue generation model. And what was great is we actually were able to co-fund, in this case, with a corporate foundation that said, not only are we going to bring some dollars to the table, but we're actually going to welcome this organization to do focus groups with our HR executives. And in some ways, that was more valuable even than the dollars, because this organization could really test their ideas about what a different revenue model would look like. Would this marketing strategy work? Would you buy this? Do our materials look attractive to you? They could test that in real time with these HR execs. So that's just one example of how to do this, but really want to encourage, other funders, especially on the grant making side, and those established, older organizations, to know that this isn't just about startups. This is really about all of us accessing these different forms of funding.
That's great. So Charles, you might be feeling a little bit left out, and this is a perfect place for you to jump in, because at Jassal, you make smart financial investments in partner organizations and programs. So what does that mean in relationship to what Rachel was just talking about?
You wrote that, or did we write that?
No, it's off your website.
All right.
Those marketing people.
That's,
how do you beef up organizations and programs?
All right, so I just joined Jassal 2 years ago, and I guess that's what we do. No, but we do very much see ourselves as a very different foundation, and I know just personally that when my position came open, they didn't want someone who came through the foundation world. They wanted someone who might bring different thinking and to this. And so I come from the nonprofit side, and I was running a nonprofit and working for Ashoka before. But really, in the end, we do think ultimately about how do we empower young people differently in this day and age. And we're in a time of rapid transition and a lot of disruptive innovation. Is this an opportunity for us to rethink what it takes to help young people from underserved communities, have access and have some social mobility? And so we look at the larger picture, and it obviously takes more than just nonprofits and community-based organizations. And so we decided to partner with Unreasonable Group and run an accelerator for growth stage companies, and support those companies that already have $10 million in revenue, to see the ones that have demonstrated some market traction, what solutions are out there showing promise, and how do they show us how the pathway of a young person going through systems of teaching and learning, of assessment and credentials, and then ultimately hiring and advancement, how that pathway can be reshaped. Can new pathways be created because of these new companies and technologies? And then how do we connect the nonprofits, the community-based organizations, and these market solutions so that we can work in collaboration to reshape the experience and the journeys and the pathways of these young people out of poverty? So we have to look for ways to collaborate, to learn from one another, and so it's never this either or, and we need to stop only working with specific silos.
Can I jump?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just on these
Elizabeth.
last 2 points, I think this is one thing that I would love to underline for the group gathered here today, which is we need more cross-pollination between some of these larger established organizations or community-based organizations and the market solutions that have emerged, particularly those that are investing in or developing new technologies or technology-enabled products and services. For those who have participated in ASU GSV, it's sort of illustrative of the fact that these worlds are incredibly siloed.
Exactly.
And in fact, I think the initial intent of that gathering was to try and cross-pollinate those different types of solutions, but it's just gotten too large. So we actually curate a gathering every year called Lift Ed, where we bring together market-based solutions with some of these more established content experts, community-based organizations, as well as community colleges and other higher ed leaders to talk about their challenges adopting new solutions, right? So to try and kind of foster those interactions and those collaborations should be top of mind for all of us, particularly as funders here.
Love that. That's a great conference, a Lift Ed. You know what? How many out there? We're going to shift, just so we can be a part of the theme shift. I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you think that in order to get funding, it's all based on connections? You just raised your hand. Connections. Takes connections to get the funding. How many of you all think it takes those winning a competition to get the funding? Just only a few for the competition piece of it. Very interesting. So let's say I've been in business for a year now, and I have a solid business plan. I've been in business for a year now. I have a solid business plan, a proven product, and there is an evidence base behind it, but I'm not making a profit yet. If I could just get my hands on some funding, I could make this work. So my question is, using your boards there, would you fund me?
I'm going to pull a Jason.
Can I see what this is?
It depends.
Yeah, it's a tricky question.
So, okay, so we have no's and yeses. Talk about that a little bit. Why don't you open up, Doug, and then I'm going to hit you up, Marissa, so get ready to jump in.
So I just think that, I mean, in theory, the way you pose the question, it's a classic VC thing, right? So the whole point of capital is to sort of help an organization grow, and you look at companies like Amazon that for years had no profits, and yet they were able to attract tons of resources. My sense is, I'm sort of curious why Jason said no, but to me, if I actually understand your product, so I wouldn't, this is one of the big problems, that the investor doesn't understand the product, but if I actually, if it was an education product and I sort of know that it works and you have traction, then that would be you would be the type of company that I would be interested in, because that is a prudent use of capital to sort of help you sort of grow your impact.
But how would I get you to understand my product? How am I going to reach you, because I don't know you?
I actually think that one of the things that philanthropies could help with is sort of on things like what actually works. So in this space, normally what happens is some Yahoo comes up with some idea, they convince one college or school to buy it, then some other superintendent goes like, oh, are you using this? Well, I'll use it too. And some of these things end up sort of scaling with thousands, with zero evidence that it does anything. So I mean, again, I think, the more that we can have wise investors who actually do know something about the space, the better off we'd be. And I think one role that philanthropy could play is, why isn't there a good housekeeping stamp of approval on, the What Works Clearinghouse, which is built by the feds, ironically, did not work at all. So we need sort of some kind of efficient, prudent system that makes it easier for Jason to not have to do so much due diligence.
It's a really interesting idea. Marissa?
Sure. So we, look for companies to be part of our program that already have product market fit for the most part, or, have already gone out and tested their product with customers. And they use the program as a time to really experiment with a hypothesis, to build their customer base, to, in some cases, pivot. So some of them are pre-revenue, not all of them. But in terms of them actually getting an investment post-program, they would have to have revenue in order to attract, early stage venture capital investors.
So what do you all over there on the end of the continuum there, what do you all think about that good housekeeping seal concept that Doug threw out on philanthropy could actually kind of take that up? I'm talking to all three of you on that end of the continuum.
Well, one thing I'll say that has been helpful is with each investment we make, I pull in our research and evaluation team to talk with the company about particular opportunities to run third-party studies, to partner with academia, and actually the ethics of some of the sort of gold standard methodologies like RCTs and the implications of using those types of methodologies, particularly in this space.
What's RCT?
A randomized controlled trial. So, I think there's, and this is where the kind of the content expertise of philanthropy can actually bring something unique to bear on behalf of this investment landscape. So a lot of our entrepreneurs have benefited from some of the interaction with some of our research and evaluation staff to think about those third-party studies, or frankly, to also think about and get access to some of the research philanthropy is funded, which doesn't make it out into the general ether in the way that it should, which is wild. So it's not that it's not a public good, it's just not widely available. And so that's a problem philanthropy needs to continue to work on addressing. But we have, for example, done a lot of research on high impact practices in higher education to support credential attainment. And we see some of the entrepreneurs that have come into our impact investment pipeline drawing on some of that research and wanting to go deeper with it. And so I think that's where a kind of nice value-add partnership can start to emerge.
Yeah. Jump in, Charles, Rachel.
Well, I think, obviously, as everyone knows, social change is a very complex space, and education in particular is a very politically charged space. There are fault lines within education, and you have to know which side you're on and what kind of impact you're creating and who likes your impact and who might not like your impact. It does take a lot of expertise and investment in the field to know how your solution is seen by other groups and to get the validation that can be helpful to say that what the impact that you're creating is the desired outcomes and have the backing of trusted groups. It's sometimes easy for companies to be able to just speak to their social impact in almost a very superficial way, and you can report the numbers, but it's harder to speak to the transformation that they can have in communities, in the lives of people. And so it's something we struggle a lot when trying to, sort of engage for-profits and other actors that we're typically not used to dealing with. And there's a lot of language translation that needs to happen. There's a lot of alignment on values that needs to happen, and it has to be done, but and it can be done, but it is very heavy lifting.
Thanks, Charles. So we're going to have to wrap up here, and you might want to get your pencils out, because this last question I'm going to ask our panelists is one that you might want to take note of very, very quickly. So this last question is, they don't get to use their boards. What one company jumps to mind for you that has been able to kind of hover across the continuum and take advantage of philanthropy, take advantage of social impact funds, take advantage of VC funds, and become successful doing so, not just for profit success, but also for outcome success?
I'll jump in first because I immediately know the answer to that question. In our world, it's a company called Credly. Credly is the largest provider of digital infrastructure for credentials. And as we've heard about, all the last day and a half, the future is not just college degrees, it's all these certificates, certifications, and other credentials, workforce credentials, employer credentials.
So write down Credly, C-R-E-D-L-Y. Doug?
I'm going to be grumpy and say none.
None. Marissa?
Upswing, so they're focused on college retention through a virtual student services platform. They've raised money from foundations like Gates, impact funds, as well as traditional VCs.
Upswing. Elizabeth.
I would mention a company called Bright Hive, which is a software product that focuses on data interoperability in the education and workforce space across government, private, and public sector actors. And they have used grant funding intelligently to run pilots with government agencies as they tee up their RFPs. So I think you have to consider the sales cycles with each of these different customer segments. Higher ed and government in particular benefit from some of those early stage pilot interventions that can be philanthropically funded. We ended up leading a Series seed round for them when they went to raise venture capital, and they're now teeing up to go to a new sort of class of VC investors. So they are moving through the spectrum.
So Bright Hive. Rachel.
I'm going to answer a slightly different question and give you an example of an organization that was really established and had a long track record, had been around for a long period of time, but reimagined its revenue generation model. And that is Workers' Defense Project. So Workers' Defense Project is a worker center in Texas. And like many worker centers, they had focused really on organizing and on policy advocacy, and with much success for some time. But a few years ago, they actually introduced a new revenue generation model, and this was around credentialing, around workforce conditions. So they now have a separate program called Better Builders Program that certifies whether employers are meeting certain standards that are required by local governments and provide that certification. What's exciting about this is, yes, it provides a reliable revenue stream that's not a project grant, that's not a membership fee for this organization. But while it seems just like a nice revenue stream, it actually points to a new theory of change for this organization that had been around for a long time. And so I think they're a great example of how, when you really get into this revenue model reimagination work, you can actually find yourself thinking about new ways that you can create change in the world.
Thanks, Rachel. And we need to wrap up real quickly. So Charles, what company?
I also would like to answer a different question, but point people to initiatives that I think are blending the best of all worlds. And this morning we heard about the X Prize, Future of Work X Prize, that involves Lumina and others. Co-Impact is another sort of funding pool that we are connected with and supporting, which funds, whether it's companies or nonprofits, working together to create large-scale system change, and that draws money from Gates and Skoll and everyone else. So, and they would fund that. It might be shifting.
Thank you so much. So everybody, you heard it here. Connections, competitions, company names, close it. That's where you come to do it. Thanks very much, and please thank our experts.
Well done.
Please welcome Heather McGowan and Ramsey Alwin to provide a great perspective on the future of work.
Good morning, and thank you for having us close it. AARP is thrilled to be here. Now, if you don't think work and think AARP, then you don't know AARP. Because we've been looking very closely at the future of work trends for our members of today and our members into the future. We're all about social impact and relevance. And we know for so many, retirement is a thing of the past. As we look at the profound and transformative megatrends around the future of work, we see a twin trend that is changing the game to the nth degree: aging and automation. McKinsey Global Institute estimated 75 to 375 million people mid-career and midlife will be displaced due to automation. If we are not intentional about ensuring individuals midlife and mid-career can make the digitization transformation, we're talking about a game changer in terms of aging into poverty. In addition, those millennials that seem forever young, guess what? They start to turn 40 in just a year or two. If we're all blessed with the gift of longevity, we need to be thinking about infusing lifelong learning lifelong. So I'm so pleased today to bring a fabulous keynote speaker to you to share some of this perspective on the profound and transformative effect of longevity on the future of work. But just to back up for a moment, for any of you that don't know who we are, AARP is a social mission organization with 38 million members 50 and older. We're the largest nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization in the world. We aim to empower people to choose how they live and how they age. We work to disrupt and challenge outdated stereotypes about what it means to get older. On behalf of our members and all of the 50+ of today and tomorrow, we advocate at the local, state, and national levels, providing them with information, products, and services to live their best lives. Although we're a US-focused organization, we've long recognized that sometimes the best ideas come from around the globe. And we believe that aging isn't just the number you turn on your birthday each year. We believe the next generation should care for the previous one and vice versa. And that good jobs are important no matter how old you are. And the future of work should be for all generations, but it requires intentionality and a deliberate approach. As you may or may not know, the age distribution of the global workforce is undergoing a massive shift. Over the next 10 years, the world's older, likely healthier populations will double. Many of these people are eager to keep working and contributing. Simultaneously, the declining birth rates have led to fewer people entering the workforce, and younger generations are placing an increased value on meaningful work. This shift is happening before our eyes. And to compete in this long-term new game, employers need to shift their approach, and learning institutions need to shift their approach even faster to unlock the future workforce potential. Business leaders have a clear self-interest in moving the process forward and pioneering inclusive approaches to optimize the value of all workers. And to demonstrate our commitment as AARP to this, we've teamed up with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the World Economic Forum in an effort called Living, Learning, and Earning Longer. Over the next 2 years, we'll redefine the business case for age diversity and inclusion, highlighting best practices from around the globe. This work will culminate with the release of a digital online learning platform at Davos at the World Economic Forum meeting in 2021. In this past year, we've engaged employers in conversations looking at these issues with the World Economic Forum and OECD. Over 100 global employers in discussions about the changing workforce, holding regional executive roundtables in North America, Europe, and Asia. Talking with executives at Allianz, Bank of America, China Life Insurance, Cisco, Dell, Fujikara, Salesforce, just to name a few, we found resounding agreement that the workplace is changing at a rapid pace. The new normal of 3, 4, 5 generations in the workforce is a game changer, moving from a 3-stage life of education, work, and retirement to the new normal of a multi-stage nonlinear life has implications for workforce policies and practices. No more is it a traditional game of retirement. Work is the future. And we need an intentional conversation about the future of work to include a full life course perspective, a life course continuum. I'm so pleased to invite to the stage Heather McGowan. She's an international speaker, writer, advisor. She provides leaders the tools they need to effectively react to the rapid and disruptive changes in education, work, and society. Her think and do tank, called Work to Learn, couldn't be more appropriate to help us get started on this journey to include longevity as a profound and transformative mega trend related to the future of work. Without further ado, Heather. Thanks.
Hi there. I think I'm about your 100th future work speaker. So I've organized the talk as follows. I'm going to really quickly bring you through some of my key frameworks on the future of work and how they relate specifically to longevity. I'm going to give you my thesis, some of the essential context on change relative to longevity. Just explain to you why I think the future of work is learning and adaptation. When you stop and think and realize that the only really sustainable competitive advantage in an organization is learning faster than your competition. You can't separate work from learning. And then my summary. So my future work thesis looks like this. So we used to be educated, and then career, and then retire. And life existed in these three discrete bands. Whether you went to university or not, education was the first third of your life. Then you got on the career escalator, you collected a pension, and then you died a year later by design. Success measures here, and far too many people are still using these success measures for higher education or whatever that training was in the first 40 years of your life was, did we codify and transfer the right skills in you to get you on that escalator? Because once we got on our escalator, our job was done. But now I think it looks like this. Life expectancy is not 90 yet for everybody, but it sure will be soon. Education becomes learning because learning to me does not imply an end state. Work becomes leverage of that learning, to signify that work and learning are a combined act. And then longevity becomes a reality. And it looks more like this. And here's the thing. This is not for the next generation, where the framework I just showed was for the generation in the workforce. This is happening. So for folks in the workforce right now, the median age is in the 40s, who started on that escalator, suddenly they've got to surf waves. Suddenly they've got to climb rocks. And they've got to realize that success measures are, can you learn, can you adapt, can you create value? It's that simple. Can you learn, can you adapt, can you create new value? And they came out of the promise of, I got good grades, that rocks them to their core. I'm going to explain to you why we've set these identity traps that we've got to dismantle. So I think in the past we learned once in order to work, and in the future we're going to work in order to learn continuously. That's why I call my think tank Work to Learn. And in the past, our identity was bestowed. So your identity was given to you by the job, the company you worked for, the title you had, the university you went to, whatever your top signal was the most important to you. And now I think we need to develop a self-actualized identity that's internally validated, that allows you to surf those waves or climb those rocks. Another thing that's happening in addition to the speed of technology, which I'm sure a lot of people have already talked about, is, as Ramsey just mentioned, the leaps we're making in longevity. So for example, if you were born during the time of the steam engine, you had 2.5 generations to absorb that change. Fast forward to today, a young person graduating today, or a person already in the workforce, is going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 different paradigm shifts to absorb within a single generation. We're not preparing people for that. And I think some of the identity traps come down to some basic questions we just keep asking each other. What do you want to be when you grow up? 65% is one of the numbers. Somebody had 85% yesterday. Let's face it, all statistics in the future are made up. We're just guessing. We're just guessing. Automated, 47%, that's the Frey Osborne model. You could drive a truck through some of the discrepancies in their model, but some large percentage of work tasks are going to be automated. Those aren't jobs. But I like what Jiminy Ramadi says from IBM, 100% of work's going to change. What's your major? We ask university students to pick a major before they step foot on campus, based upon what they've been told they were good at in high school. Stop and think about what you were told you were good at in high school. I sure would not be standing on this stage if I was limited to that. Only 27%, according to a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, ever work in the field of their undergraduate major. And guess where that 27% is? I am confident from my work in universities, it's all faculty. Because they tell you, don't take anything outside your major, pick a good major, stay in your major, because that was their experience. Whenever I speak to universities, I say, you guys aren't normal. You're not the norm. The best research I've seen on what young people will experience graduating today, and this is true for people already in the workforce, is 16, 17 different jobs across 5 different industries. So let's consider that higher ed institutions measure themselves by yield, graduation rate, and placement in a first job that may last 2.8 years. Graduation rates we track at 6 years, and debt's probably 20 to 30 years. We're completely upside down on this. A study out of the UK, which really intrigued me, and I've talked to the researchers about it, is that the loss of a job can take twice as long to recover from than the loss of a primary relationship. That's because all we do at cocktail parties is say, hey, who are you with, what do you do? That's how we define ourselves, and when that's taken away, we're rocked to our core. So now I think helping people adapt to change, including job loss, which is a norm and change, is everyone's #1 job. It's your #1 job as a parent, it's a #1 job as your friend, it's a #1 job as a business leader, and as an educator preparing them for that. This is a study by PwC that was looking at the top skills in demand in the workforce and how hard they are to find. I thought it was particularly interesting. So risk management, digital skills, and STEM, they make it on the board. STEM's incredibly important. Digital fluency is important. It's not going to save us. What I think is interesting is what they've identified as the most difficult skills to find that are also the most crucial to their business. They call this the skills battleground. And it's interesting, they do these surveys, and they're on a 22nd annual, I think, global survey. And that availability of talent is moving up and up the ladder in terms of what's most crucial to their business. Terrorism and regulation are always kind of 1 and 2, but it's getting up there. And IBM did this study comparing data they had from 2016 to 2018 in terms of the top 10, they used 12, so I used the top 10, skills that are most important in the workforce globally. Something interesting is happening. It's not that STEM's not important. It's not that digital skills are not important. It's just that we're realizing that we're leaving the human skills out. Guess who's good at the human skills? Much of our older workforce. So I think these shifts are really interesting because they're becoming really difficult to find. As Ramsey mentioned, we have 3, 4, 5, depending on what industry you work in. If you're in higher ed, it's definitely 5 in the workforce. And you've got the silent, the boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And it's interesting what cultural moments define them because it is how they view the world. It's also interesting how they view work because that's how they enter into that social contract with the workplace. So for silent generation, it was a long-term career, like dedicate yourself to a good job with a good company. Boomers were like, give it your all, then retire and celebrate. I'm a Gen Xer. We had the corporate raids of the 80s and divorce, so we just don't trust anybody. And then you've got the millennials and Gen Z who are like, I want to learn, they're on learning tours that align with their values. The other thing that's interesting is what communication was to them as a norm when they were born. Because what's interesting is I think it moves from synchronous to asynchronous. And when we've got a 50% increase in collaboration in the workforce over the last 2 decades, paying attention to how the different generations communicate as a norm is really important. So I think the future of work is learning and adaptation. And here are the 3 stages. Earnings suddenly has to be another decade if we're going to live to 100, which is what we believe is happening. The fastest growing part of the aging population right now is not the kid who's born today who's going to be 102 or 150. It's the 50-year-old who didn't know they were going to live to 90 and didn't prepare for it. So I've had the good fortune of crossing paths with a person who's done some really interesting research on cognitive peaks. All our understanding around brain science is really from information in the 70s. I was born in the 70s. The world has changed a lot since the 70s in terms of how much information is coming at us, how we deal with that complexity. So for sure, processing power does peak before the age of 30. Doesn't mean it goes like this, it goes more like this. Our ability to store and quickly retrieve information, otherwise known as fluid intelligence. After 40, synthesizing information, judgment, learning, and knowledge are later. And then what's interesting is all the peaks in between that we haven't been paying attention to. So fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence become those kind of goalposts. That's what everybody refers to. This is research from the 70s. What's in the middle is your executive function doesn't form until you're about 29. Your prefrontal cortex is not fully formed, so you're almost 30, after you've signed all those agreements for debt and picked that good major. Your ability to concentrate doesn't hit till 43. Well, when you're outside the bounds of what we've thought of as education. Reading emotions at 48, increasingly important in the workforce. Learning new information, deeply learning, not rapid learning, but deeply learning information is 50. And don't play Scrabble with anybody over 67 because they have the best vocabularies. So when you look at this continuum of learning, there's never been a better argument for lifelong learning. So the World Economic Forum has their list of the top 10 skills of the future. And I took that list and I spoke to the researcher who had done those cognitive peak research, and I said, this is how I see it. And fortunately, she agreed. So cognitive flexibility may peak before 30 with fluid intelligence, because as far as we know, that's probably right. Critical thinking, we're not sure. You have to have a certain amount of context, so it's probably post-30, it's probably somewhere in there. Complex problem solving as well. A lot of disagreements on creativity. Some people think it peaks when it's younger, but there's a lot of evidence that creativity for some folks peaks at as late as 70. And then what I think is really interesting is 60% of those top 10 skills, 6 out of 10 peak after the age of 40. So people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment, decision-making, service orientation, and negotiation are all skills you need some life experience to develop. And if these are the future skills that we're looking for, there's never been a better argument to invest in people over 40. So to summarize, kind of the old model looked like this: education, work, retire, sort of the 3 boxes of life. You went through it like that. You were kind of relatively productive in the middle of your life. You lived about 73 years. Now there's another model that's emerging that I think is absolutely false, which is, you still get the 18 to 30 education, then you work for 20 years, then you have this reskilling moment, and then you work for another 20 years, and then you retire. The reality is your job's moving. If you're not moving, it's moving away from you. We need to reskill and upskill every day, not waiting until our job has told us we're no longer in it. So the new model, I think, looks like this. Learning is continuous and lifelong. Work is 50 to 60 years. And then retirement becomes a recondition and retire, depending on where you are. And we kind of move through it like this. So the blocks shift on their side. So to summarize, I think the job change is your #1 job. The future work, I believe, is learning and adaptation, and the difference between adaptation and flexibility, I think, is important to understand. Flexibility, this audience, you guys look pretty good.
So it obviously doesn't anybody. The fact is, it hurts some way more than others. If you look at women and the range of fields of study and occupations they pick, it's about half of that of men. And the ones that they don't pick happen to be the ones that earn the most. Highest job growth, highest wage growth, notably STEM. And the examples are what you would expect: social pressures, stereotypes, lack of role models. But the big one still is not having an idea of what the job prospects are. So I think it's fair to say that it'll be a good idea to give some early context for students as they're making their academic choices. What about after the students pick a path? Let's assume it's the right path. They're on track towards an occupation of their choice. How are we doing in terms of advising them? The whole advising ecosystem is much more challenging. As we've heard over the last couple of days, students now, the whole landscape of students is much different than a couple of days ago. A lot more working learners. 70% of all college students are working learners, some working 10 hours, some working 40 hours. And most of them working jobs that really have nothing to do with the profession of their choice. And it's a challenge, right? And once you work more than 15 hours, it really starts having an impact in terms of performance and persistence. And as you would expect, it hurts some way more than others. Higher income students have the support: family, friends, career mentors, an overall support system to give them advice outside of academics and careers, like financial advice and so on and so forth, which is important if you're working. Lower income students, not so much, right? And it's a real problem. And so overall, the idea of advising, needing to be personalized and holistic, is more important than ever. And colleges struggle to achieve this. And why so, right? And so let's look deeper through the lens of a college. And if you look at advising overall, the average advisor-student ratio is about 400 to 1. If I told a community college leader that they can have a ratio of 400 to 1, they'd be thrilled, right? So you're typically talking 1,000 students to 1 in most community colleges. Imagine what they can do, right, if they're dealing with 1,000 students. Leave personalized out of the picture, leave holistic out of the picture, right? They're just submerged in the deluge of students that they have to deal with. And what about careers? Any college, when they think about careers, they think of career services and a career center. As we saw, if most people don't ever visit career centers, it's hard to help, right? And this is what I would call the old approach, or maybe I should call it the current approach, right? Where we really need to go to in terms of careers is this notion of embedded career context. So information about careers doesn't come from one department. It's embedded through the college journey of students, from the early academic choices they make, from the choices they make in terms of how they get ready, the courses, the co-curricular activities. It's sort of embedded throughout the journey, and everybody sort of contributes to it. What about advising? Right? If we did a survey of advisors, they would say, look, we'd like 2 to 3 times as many advisors. That's not possible. And in some cases, it's probably not needed as well, because there's all this information that's stuck in different silos within campuses, that if you found a way to get it directly to students and empower them and unlock this notion of personalized self-advising, then it takes the load off advisors themselves. They can focus on more high-value conversations, more of the holistic advising that we so desperately need. And so the promised land really that we're all going towards is the idea of early embedded career context, the idea of empowering the student to help them navigate themselves, but in doing so, provide the bandwidth for the campus to provide the holistic advising and support that they need, right? And ultimately, they can focus on connecting their academic experiences to careers while juggling their work and everything else. This has been the mission for us at Pragya, right? So the anchors being unlock self-advising, unlock this notion of embedded career context, unlock holistic guidance. And I'll show you a couple of examples of the work that we're doing with a few of our partners. And the way we approach it is, there's information that's stuck in all of these different silos, and our job is to tap into all of that and float the students as it maps to their college journey. So the first one that I talk about is this notion of exploring. And really the idea is the ability to contextualize for students as they're making these early choices. And we're working with a number of partners on this, a couple of them shown up here. And so, if you think about students thinking through the lens of an academic interest or a purpose that they're working towards, how can you provide them a context of the careers? So we work with our partner NZ on getting labor market data, pathways that alumni have taken, right, and program options that they have. If they look at it through the lens of a career, what are the program options? And are there other things that fill the skill gap that may be there because my program only covers 80% of what my occupation needs in terms of skills and competencies? So once they pick a certain path, then they're into tracking and planning their way to the finish line, right? And so National University is a partner of ours that we work with, and they're a prototypical university, who represents the kind of student body that we talked about. A lot of working adults, a lot of military students, heterogeneous student population that advisors have a hard time dealing with, right? Open access. And so what we do working with them is sort of provide a personalized dashboard for their students, again, tapping into information that's already there in the campuses, and providing a way for students to track their progress on 2 dimensions. First dimension they care most about, right? Tracking their progress to completion of a credential or a degree that they're enrolled in. It could be a certificate, it could be a bachelor's, associate's degree program, it doesn't matter, right? The second dimension, which we're beginning to work on, is showing students how they're tracking in terms of competencies and skills towards a career that they're shooting towards, right? Being able to contextualize both of these dimensions, in terms of a personalized dashboard, and if you provide them a personalized portal, it becomes a vehicle for you to recommend co-curricular and other kinds of activities, right? And really the way National approaches this is, it's a way to create transparency, and you take the load of information exchange away from advisors, and so advisors can focus on other things, right? As I said, high-value conversations. And from a planning perspective, it's about trying to create an integrated plan, right? So what is needed for me to get myself career ready? Courses is one aspect of it. Maybe there are other things that I need to do, boot camps, apprenticeships, experiential learning, right? How do I put all of that together into one holistic plan? Right? And we're going to dive deeper into particularly the work that we're doing with National University, a case study, if you will, and some of the results that we are seeing at 11:30. So I would love for you to join us there if you want to learn more about the work we're doing. And we'd like to learn about some of the problems that you're facing as well. And to that end, we are capturing the voice of higher ed leaders and workforce board members in a survey that we've published in the app. We'd love to get your input. And we're going to publish the results back to the community here. But the goal for us is to learn, right? And this is still early days in trying to sort of address this gap between careers and college. Thank you.
Thanks to all our speakers for this morning. For the next 2 hours, you've got learning sessions, and then please come back at 12:30 for another great lunch from the Cowgirl of Santa Fe. See you in 2 hours.